Common ground is in short supply. When it comes to criminal justice, we don't listen or trust each other. The system is in deep trouble. It has been for years. We need a common language to make change and a new space to do it. Welcome to Commons, an online space for criminal justice data co-created by the public and the police, prosecutors, and courts who serve them. We team up to make data transparent, to set and track common goals, and ultimately build accountability and the road to trust, which are critical to lasting reform. Reducing racial and economic disparities, reducing jail and prison populations, making the system work better. Data is the vehicle to make change. Commons is how we get there.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Today, we are here to launch Commons. It's a new criminal justice data dashboard that is co-created with the community. We named it Commons because, like all green open spaces, data are a resource that belongs to and affects the whole of a community. Now, there's this story in my book that I tell all the time. It's about a prosecutor who had no idea he hadn't prosecuted a domestic violence case in 21 years. And I'm thinking about the people impacted by that prosecutor today. And I feel a little emotional because I think that never would have happened in that community if they had had a Commons. And by that I mean a place for people to see what this prosecutor was doing and a constituency to hold him accountable. Now, since Measures for Justice started a decade ago, we've learned that there just isn't a great mechanism for people in power and their communities to have the hard conversations, fact-based conversations about policy and goals and trends and patterns. So what makes Commons special? It has what people want. So here's what the people in Yolo County, California wanted, where we did the pilot. A policy goal that the prosecutor commits to that can be tracked every month. Assurance that the data wasn't cooked. That's where our experience came in. A monthly stream of data and the ability to filter the hell out of the data to see if and which people are being treated differently for the same crimes. An easy way to immediately send what you're seeing to legislators, to county officials, and to local media. They also want other data sets, like police and health, and we're working on that. But the story of why this work matters is not mine to tell. Today, that story will be told by three people who really know the system from all sides. We have Tessa Smith. She's chair of the Yolo County, California District Attorney's Multicultural Community Council. Jeff Reisig, Yolo County District Attorney, who originally approached us about this work. And Reginald Dwayne Betts, poet, lawyer, and director of the Million Book Project. I don't want to spend too much time telling you how amazing these people are, but they are amazing. Each one is brilliant and very blunt and honest. So I can't wait to have this discussion about trust, transparency, accountability, and all the messy stuff in between. So let's get started. Okay, Tessa, the first question is for you. The George Floyd trial is happening right now, and the nation is reliving how the murder of one man can hurt and traumatize thousands. Can you talk about how your community is hurting And what could a tool like Commons do for your community?
Thank you, Amy. Well, people all across the country are hurting and reliving in the aftermath of George Floyd, and that's for sure. It traumatized thousands, but it probably re-traumatized millions of people. Because, you know, history, it lives in each one of us, and there's just no doubt about it. In our community, there was a lot of pain and a lot of shock and awe. And I can truthfully say that it took me personally a couple of weeks before I could even articulate all of my feelings. Also, in our community, lots of other people came out to talk about what they had seen in the streets with Derek Chauvin leaning on George Floyd's neck. We have friends who recalled Tiananmen Square, friends who came up recalling, you know, Burma and Armenia and other atrocities that their families and their ancestors lived through. And it triggered something in not just Black people and not just Asian people in that moment, but all kinds of people. And then there was also in our community a lot of shock and awe because there's, you know, as in any community, there's a wide range of experience present. And so there were those in the community who had never really come face to face with racism, with what structural, systemic racism looks like. And they were at a loss on how to have a conversation. So that's where we were, and that's where we are right now in this moment. But what Commons can do for us is give community and system a way to have a dialogue that can stay on the rails, because their data represents people. Everybody that's in a jail in a diversion program, everybody that's been arrested, somebody's mother's, daughter's, father's son or daughter, cousin, brother. And so that's one thing that the community feels and brings a lot of emotion into any of those conversations with systems. But between our district attorney and the criminal justice system as a whole, we have to be able to sit down in our humanity and have a conversation based in fact. And so Commons gives us a way to have that conversation. And that is the work that needs to be done between assassinations.
Thank you. You know, what Tessa just did was sort of allude to the fact that there is a hostility right now to prosecutors and to police. And, you know, historically, there's always been a real tension between DAs and communities. Jeff, I was just wondering if you could talk about this climate as well. You know, in this time when prosecutors are continually being attacked, why do you even want a public dashboard? And why did you decide to create one with your community?
Thanks, Amy, for the question, and thanks for having me today. I've been a prosecutor for 24 years, and you know, I've come to firmly believe that in order to have any real, meaningful, actionable conversation about criminal justice or criminal justice reform, you have to have thorough and accurate data. And what's frustrated me over my career has been how difficult it has been to get that data from all levels of government, particularly in the criminal justice system. It just lacks meaningful transparency. And I think, frankly, that's true across the country from what I know. And that gap in the availability of thorough and accurate data erodes the trust between the community and the government. And it's because of that the accountability is missing. And so when you have real simple questions about what's going on in the criminal justice system and they can't be answered, then it's a mystery. And that mystery just drives the feeling that there is a lack of accountability in the system. And so in my opinion, it's those things. It's the lack of transparency. It's the lack of accountability that has been a key failing in the system and a driver of the righteous feeling of many that the system is just broken. And so for me, this partnership, why did we do this? Why did I reach out to you? This partnership for me is about a few key things. First, it's about, shining a bright light on all of the available data in my county so that we can take the mystery away. And as Tessa said, so that we can have, meaningful conversations about tough issues. It's about continuing to build the trust with my community, and in my community, I have the Multicultural Community Council that I meet with every month, and many other people. And so it's about continuing to build trust for them and provide access to this information. It's about ensuring that the criminal justice system is accountable, not only in the promises that we've made, but in how we treat people. And it's about promoting smart reforms and making sure that the decisions we make on how to try and fix the system are based on real, accurate, thorough data and facts. And so that's it. It's I think a simple formula. And to quote your motto, no data, no change, it's spot on. And I agree with that 100%. And that's why I reached out to you over a year ago. And that's why I'm all in.
Awesome. It's this idea that we could possibly get to trust. I mean, we start with transparency, we create accountability, and then we get to trust. I mean, we've got here Reginald Dwayne Betts. Dwayne, you've been incarcerated. Your mother's been a victim of violent crime. You've been a public defender. You're a graduate of Yale Law School. And now you even pick prosecutors for the state of Connecticut. Okay. I wonder what you think of all this. Hearing all of this about transparency and the possibility of trust, and given the fact that you do pick prosecutors from the state of Connecticut, if you could wave a magic wand and get a commons for the whole state, what could it help with?
Yeah, I should say I don't actually pick prosecutors. It's 6 of us, and so I want to
right, not
some
just...
of that responsibility away from me, And yeah, I do think it's true, right? It can, without data, you can have no real substantial change, because change from what? And I think what happens is, I might say without data, you can have no real justice, right? And change as a model, as a representation of justice, right? Because I think right now you have people who want things, and what I want is in vogue, and what I want is less people in prison. But in the past, you had other people who wanted different things. They wanted more people in prison. They wanted an end to violent crime. I think the communities become safer when you have less people in prison and more education. Without any real data that's tracking how the system is stifling those aims or helping to facilitate those aims, then all you have is justice by who speaks the loudest. What do I think about the commons? I do think, Connecticut has its own push to start collecting data. What I find wild, though, wow, is that for decades we have had no data. People have said, lock them up, throw away the key. People have said, let's get rid of parole. People have said nothing works. And nobody said, well, wait, have we tried to track what's happening? And so what I find amazing about this conversation is that it's a product of how we've had justice by fiat for a very long time. And nobody's willing to admit that. I've sat in rooms, and I wasn't a public defender. I just worked in a public defender's office as a defense attorney as a recent law graduate. I wasn't even licensed, but I was allowed to represent clients, and I represented clients as a law student as well. But what that meant was that, Connecticut also has a unique system in which they have pretrials, and pretrials, the plea bargaining that's done, the discussion of the cases that's done is with the defense attorney, the prosecutor, and the judge. And frequently is with, multiple defense attorneys if they're in the same firm. So if it's all public defenders, and it's frequently with multiple prosecutors because the prosecutors all work for the same firm. But what happens is you get to see how like cases should be treated alike. And I do think some norms likely get developed in that office. I mean, I've had some really hard cases turn out the way that I might have wanted them to turn out, and they didn't turn out that way. And they didn't turn out that way under the cover of darkness. They turned out that way with other prosecutors hearing the arguments I made, and other prosecutors hearing the pushback that the prosecutor's office was making, and the judge hearing all of that. But it's interesting because every decision was made without a sense of data, and it's like, without data, discretion kind of reigns supreme. And I don't want to curb discretion. I want to inform discretion. And I think data informs discretion.
Gosh, you've just said so many powerful, interesting things. One of the things you talk about is, really sort of benchmarking things, being able to say, should, we be able to, people across, different races, we should be able to see and compare how they're being punished. And the other thing is that would be visible to everybody. And there's a thing in this tool that is one of the things that we're most proud of, is that it has a goal on it. So the prosecutor needs to pick a goal, ideally with the community, right? And in this case, for the first goal, Jeff picked a goal. And I want to ask Jeff why you picked that goal. And, you made that goal. If you look at the portal, people who are out there looking at the portal, you can see that he has met the goal. Some months he didn't meet it, but other months he did. Now, how do you plan to sustain that goal? And are you going to pick your next goal with the community? Like, how does this work? Because as Dwayne said, we haven't had this before. And there's a reason why we haven't had it, right, Dwayne? We do measure everything. We measure schools and education and water supply and sports. My God, we measure everything, but yet the justice system hasn't been measured in this way. And there's a reason why the system has been allowed to go unmeasured. But now Jeff is saying, okay, I'm going to goal set, and I'm going to tell you what I'm doing, and I'm going to hold myself and the community responsible. And how are you going to sustain that, Jeff?
Right. So the goal we chose for the first measurement for Commons was to increase our felony diversions by 10% by July of 21. And here's why I chose that. First of all, we've had some really great success in my county in diverting people out of the criminal justice system. And we've done that for thousands of misdemeanors and felonies. And in particular, in my county, we have a program that is our flagship diversion program. That's a restorative justice-based diversion program. It's a total alternative to a traditional prosecution. And it involves community members, it involves the victim, and it involves a process which is not punitive, but is based on a harm reduction restorative justice model. And what we found is that even with felony cases, the right felony cases, that we are seeing lower recidivism rates, much higher victim satisfaction rates, and just a general better success than a traditional prosecution. So now, I should point out that, diverting felonies is not typical probably across America. I'd say that, generally you probably don't find a lot of DAs that are diverting felonies. We do, and we don't just do it with our restorative justice program. We also do it with people who suffer from mental illness. We have a mental health diversion and an addiction intervention diversion program. So we are, robustly using our diversion tools. But we felt like moving forward with Commons, we really wanted to highlight our diversion efforts on felonies. And again, we want to reduce the incarceration rates, hold people accountable in ways that make sense, make sure that victims are taken care of. But we also want to make sure that the people who have been arrested have the opportunity to participate in a program that we believe will leave them better on the back end and won't leave them with the stigma of a conviction that could inhibit their ability to get a job or to get housing. And so we chose 10% as a start. And the reason we chose 10% is we felt like it was a good place, to start balancing all the competing interests, and we'll see how it goes. And the great thing about Commons is, we're already using it. I've been using it since the moment you sent me the link to it several weeks ago. And, we want to expand these programs for sure. There are limits, I should point out. These programs are all limited by space and funding, and those are always issues where we're pushing for more growth. But where Commons is really going to help us is we're going to be able to dive deep now to track cases that maybe should be diverted, and maybe they should be diverted earlier. And so that's, how we're planning to use the tool to sustain the 10% and hopefully grow it. But again, to go to something that Dwayne said, we're trying to use good discretion based on the data. And so while I'd like to say we're always going to hit 10%, I can't guarantee that, because we're going to do our best to use discretion to balance all of those interests. But, that's the challenge.
Anyone else want to chime in on anything? Because Tessa, I got a good one for you, but I just want to, anyone else want to add anything? Okay, Tessa, we often hear here that, transparency is the first step as a data organization. People always, we say that. But what's the second step? She
said she had a good question. She had a question that's going to get you elected governor.
I'm struggling to figure out how to answer it, but okay, finish the question.
What do you see communities doing? You've come with us to other communities. You've come, you've come to some pretty divided communities with us and talked about what it's like to have a commons. What do you see communities doing with this data, and what do you see prosecutors doing with it? What do you see? What's the second step?
Well, with that kind of transparency and with Commons providing objective, removed data that you've selected, that you've studied and made sure was the facts, and you don't include anything else. That's huge for transparency that Jeff has taken this outside of the district attorney's, serving up his information, but has just totally turned it over to you as a neutral third party. It can go a mighty long way. Now, what could the community do with it? We do, in fact, have some dynamic diversion programs. And Jeff mentioned a couple of them. We have mental health court. We've got a drug intervention court, steps to success. Now, if the community goes into Commons and sees some disproportionality in the level of incarceration, in the arrest, and who gets diverted to those programs, the community can then use the data to not only suggest, yes, I know these are programs that people have, and this is what has been said, that the people have to want to be in the program, and we can't force anybody to go in the program. But then it allows us to suggest to the system that you've never given them any reason to trust anything that you've offered. Maybe you suggest recruiting. We think you need to recruit people into these programs to offer balance. We get to really use that data to have a real conversation on same time for the same crime. We get to use that data, and I call it poking the bear. Just hey, look over here. And we get to be targeted, and we can be surgical in how we work with a system to bring true reform and change into spaces. So we could go a bunch of places with this. We want to go a little bit more out in front to where those arrests came from. Who's doing the most arresting? Are they valid cases? You know, what's the length of time between arrest and arraignment? What's the dispositions? Are they fair? Are they consistent? You know, and I love what we were talking about earlier, because Jeff has demonstrated it in some respects, but it gives a real opportunity for the district attorney's office, the criminal justice system, to come into conversation with the community to discuss where the discretion is. You know, law is, you know, law, but I'm glad to hear that discretion is there also. And so how we interpret it to make sure that we are truly carrying justice and equity and justice forward lies in that data conversation.
And the data is not going to show, I mean, Jeff always talks about the good, bad, and the ugly. I mean, Jeff, what are you going to do when you see something scary? I mean, like, you know, there are going to be disparities. What are you going to do, you know, if you find data points that don't make you look good?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. And from the moment, you know, we started talking about this concept that's now a reality, I said to you that if we're going to build a transparency portal for America, it's got to show the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's got to show it all, right? The data is what it is, and it's the people's data. It doesn't belong to the government. And what we need to do once that data is out there is, number one, we need to do a deep dive into things that we see that look off or look just flat out look wrong. And we need to try and get into the root causes of what's going on here. And as Tessa mentioned, you know, that can go all the way back, at least in the portal that you've built, that you're hosting, Commons. You go all the way back to the arrest and what the agencies are sending over. And we need to look at root causes of why there might be a disparity, for example. And then we need to do everything we possibly can to fix it. And that's, you know, the job that's my job. That's the job of other elected officials. And it's the job of the community, I believe, to be engaged and informed and to hopefully work with us to address those issues. I'll just give you one example. You know, once Commons was launched, we immediately started using the data. And one of the things that we noticed was that there was a disparity in the race of the people being arrested that were referred to my office by local police agencies. And in some cases, you know, that disparity seemed significant, quite significant. And so then that begs the question, what's going on? You know, why is this agency higher than this agency in the disparity of arrest between, you know, whites, African Americans, Hispanics, et cetera. And so we could talk all day about all of the different data points that are related to that. But here's what I can tell you. We saw that. We're asking questions. And at the same time, we're proactively doing something moving forward. And what we're doing here in Yolo is we're actually going to be launching on May 1st a race-blind charging module that will be built in to our case management system. And what I mean by that is that we are working with a national university who has built the code that will program into our case management system. I think it'll be the first in the country that will allow the police reports to come over to my office, and my prosecutors will charge the case without seeing any information about what the race of the suspect is. No name, no race identifiers, location, all of it will be stripped. And the reason for that is we're trying to be proactive about addressing the disparity. And for us, we start that work the moment we get the case referred to us by the agency. And so the idea is that prosecutors will not know what the race is of the suspect when they make that charging decision. So this is just one example of how we can use the data to drive new programs, new decisions, reforms. And what I hope is going to be, you know, a way that brings more procedural justice to the system.
See, the thing is, you know, Tessa's talking about being surgical. You're talking about trust, changing policies with race-blind charging. And so let's take a step back here. Take a step back and think about, Dwayne, this is for you. This is a good one. You know, right now we're in this moment where even all of these reforms, there are lots of competing ideologies, right? Left, right, tear down the system, work with it. A lot of people think it's ridiculous that we can bring people together and find common ground. I mean, how does this all smack you, Dwayne? I mean, how can we bring people together and is it a pipe dream that we can say, can we begin to find a common ground, a common understanding and change this? Can you just, how does this all strike you?
I got a phone call 2 seconds ago. I had to answer it. It was from a prison. And so I know when I get a call that I got to answer because I recognize the zip code. And so I muted myself. I picked up the call and I knew why I was getting the call. I put in a pardon application for somebody and the state where I'm working, they called me and they needed the person's social security number. And so I made a bunch of phone calls and was like, yo, give me this information now because your pardon application might be getting reviewed ASAP, and I don't want to hold it up for a second. And so I called the prison 3 or 4 times, talked to the counselor, talked to the unit manager, talked to the records department, and finally got somebody to get word to him to call me. So I pick up the phone. I tell him I'm on a call, but let me get that information so I can get it to the folks, and then I'll call you back. I think a lot of times we be having these conversations like it's not people in prison that have been there for 20, 25 years. And so when you ask me, like, can we come together and have these conversations? I got friends that have been locked up 20, 25 years, going on 30 years. I've represented people who did 30 years in a box. And I get that this discussion right now about front end justice isn't about back end justice. But if attorney Jeff, right, if Jeff looks at the data and sees some mistakes have been happening over the past 2 years, then his office might do something to correct some of the mistakes that happened over the past 20 years. And let's not even say, they might not even be mistakes. Different people look at situations in a different way. If we just come to the conclusion that having looked at the data, because the data, what the data represents is stories though, and so some of those stories we won't like. Some of those stories will be of the person that kicked Asian American woman in the chest, right? Some of those stories will be things that we don't like, but then the data will say, but if you dig into that story a little bit more, you can see some of the institutional failures that made this crime likely to happen, right? And that's why you have some people who work in the police department who say, well, wait a minute. Before we look to throw somebody under the bus, let's think about the whole bandwidth of what happened and why is it that we have institutions called prisons that lead more often than not to homelessness. So what I think, your question was, why do I have any kind of sense of hope in this moment and belief that folks could come together and make change, is I think that everybody has said something today that acknowledges that the data is an entryway into a story. And a lot of times the stories have gone unheard because the data hasn't been assessed. And when you start to look at that data, I think you start to pull certain stories together and create other stories. So by trying to divert by 10% felonies, which I assume is probably going to be mostly nonviolent felonies, but you just encourage some prosecutors to say, well, this kid does have a robbery, but it was with a BB gun. Maybe this is one I'm a divert. And what happens is you could create some other stories that create some alternative means of prosecution backed with the data that says, in fact, the community was safer and the person who was harmed felt more satisfied by this outcome than what would have been an outcome a few years ago. So, I find myself encouraged because I'm not even supposed to be a part of this conversation. I could have had life in prison. And it's hard for me not to be encouraged in a space where I'm not only free, but I could fight for other folks' freedom. I don't think we've won by any means, but I think as long as we're trying to find a way to create new stories and attract those new stories, it's a possibility of having a profound sense of having something more than a profound sense of regret 5 years from now. I mean, it must be disgusting, to have a job as a defense attorney, a prosecutor, a judge, and 10 years down the line, what you have is a profound sense of regret because you didn't do half of what you might have done to make the world better while you were there, And so I think data might help us from regretting more than we regret now.
Yeah. First of all, you've said so many things. I can't wait to listen to this afterwards that were so brilliant in that. comment. And obviously, if there's a call from prison, I understand, take it during this call. And Jeff, I mean, what do you say? Can you use the data to correct past? Jeff, can we start using the data because he's got a real point there. It's not just prospective. It's great that we've got that data, but can we look and begin to think about what we've done and maybe even begin to, give some relief to people, or is that too much of an imagination at this moment?
No, I think that's spot on. Dwayne is right. And that's the awesome thing about this Commons is that, we now have the ability to access a batch of data and look back years back. And if we see radical disparities, we can then ask questions and dig deeper and deeper. And if we identify cases that we believe were just completely, that it was excessive, it was, maybe at the time, like Dwayne said, maybe, people thought it was the right thing to do, right? But we're evolving as a society. And so maybe now we look back at some of those cases and say, wow, that guy got way too much prison time for a bag of dope or whatever. And we have the ability, at least in California, with a new law, fairly new law, to ask a judge to resentence somebody. And we've done it. I've done it quite a bit. And colleagues of mine around the state have done it. I know there's a similar law in Washington. There's one that's coming on the books in Oregon, hopefully. And so I think Dwayne hit it on the head. I mean, this thing goes both ways. It's a prospective tool to try and reduce injustice and disparity and to be accountable, but we can also use it to look back.
Yeah, but I just have one more question for both Tessa and Dwayne, actually. This is for both of you. We're talking about data and, Dwayne, you probably know a lot of advocates and you're an advocate for education, but I mean, in prison, and Tessa, you know a lot of advocates too, There's a lot of talk now about truth telling and what's fact and what's not. With these kinds of discussions going on within the community, particularly groups that are advocating for reform, do you feel like people believe in data? And what can we do to resolve those issues? Like, you don't hear, advocates being like, oh, I'm going to go get the data now. Why isn't it, should it be part of the discourse or no?
What, should data be part of the discourse?
Yeah, I know. I mean, you don't hear in terms of, do you feel like people believe in data? Do you feel like people in communities?
I've got to make a confession. I'm not really, I haven't in the past always been big on data. I always would tell my boss, look, I'm going to deal with the people, you crunch them into numbers. I don't like that part. However, the data, when we're having conversations about policy and about change, that's one way to speak in terms of numbers, but we will never forget that the data has blood, sweat, and tears on it. Those are people. So the system may take it and use it in one way to measure, so can the community. They also can put a face right back on those numbers and those people, so that as we interpret those numbers made back into people again, we can have a conversation that stays in truth long enough for us to seek, real solutions. So data's coming back in style. I'm going to help bring it back into style because I'm going to use it to tell a whole bunch of stories to bring about change. And so will our community. I do believe that.
Yeah, and here in Connecticut, they have a similar law on the books to prosecutors being able to call for a resentence. They're able to call for a sentence modification. And all the prosecutors say they use it. Well, the data is what will verify whether or not they do use it.
That's right.
And the data will verify whether or not the people who are applying for sentence modifications need attorneys to do a better job representing themselves. I mean, I think data is vital, and people don't talk about it a lot, but that doesn't mean people don't recognize the use of it. I think it just means that people don't have necessarily had a facility with it. to have ownership over it. And I think the Commons gives people access to a dashboard that gives us some ownership over it, so we can filter our stories through some numbers.
If I may, I really appreciate what you said there, Dwayne, because, and that's what I'm really enjoying about the Commons. It's, if you've got a mouse, you can scroll through, you can drop down, you hover over stuff, and boom, it pops up. And the more you use it, the more familiar you are with it, where you can see a story developing almost right before your very eyes if you know what you're looking for inside that data. And that is how we're going to bring about the change and bring community into those conversations, because that's what they want to hear is there a way forward for some of the harms that have been done by a system? You know, before we're looking at a community, especially people of color, who, if they knew anything about data, was, for instance, I might know that over decades, almost 10% of all Black men were incarcerated. What does that do to families? What does that do to children? What does it do to the next generations? You know, after Michael Brown was killed, I heard a statistic that said twice a week, every week, there's a Black man killed by a white police officer in America. And I'm like, that can't be true. Oh my God. You know, but I couldn't quite confirm that data because not everybody's collecting it. We need to know what the heck's going on. And then the data holds the truth. And that's why there's a big expectation from you, Amy Bach, and Commons, you know, because you're the outside third party that's going to keep it neutral so that both sides can use the same information to enter into conversations to make a point about what needs to happen next.
All right, I'm going to take questions from people because we're getting there on time and the clock's blinking on me, but anybody else want to add anything? This is awesome. I love everything you guys are saying, and I got to say, I said in the beginning, I feel emotional. I really do at this moment, because this really was the original vision. Anyone want to add anything before I go to questions?
I was just going to add something that, you know, Tessa just mentioned, that, you know, one of the reasons why Commons is so unique, and I think it's one of a kind in the nation, is that, you know, we just turned over the data to you. And so it's a third party, an independent, you know, third party who's validating the data and put it out there. And I just think, you know, for prosecutors across America who are considering, you know, doing this, you know, I just think you have to engage a third party, because there is so much distrust still in so many communities between, you know, the folks and the prosecutor. And if a prosecutor puts it out all by himself or herself, I don't think it's going to be as powerful. So that's just my 2 cents.
Anybody else? Dwayne?
I agree with that.
Jeff, here's some questions that have come in. There's an article in the Sacramento Bee today about Commons. And one thing it mentions is that not every prosecutor might be ready for this work. How can we get them there? You know, and again, you know, how are people responding in your office? What scares you about it?
Yeah, so, I mean, this is a big deal. Make no mistake. I mean, I think, you know, anytime you've got, you know, a massive, you know, turnover of data, it raises anxiety in some people. But I've said it a million times, you know, this is the people's data and it's the right thing to do. And I just keep telling people that the data is what it is. And if we're all in this together, and if we're going to have informed conversations about getting it right, the data is the common language. And so I just keep saying that. And frankly, I'm just going to say, you know, I think California, I'm going to brag a little bit. I think California is ahead of the curve in the sense that, you know, most of my colleagues embrace everything we're talking about today. And in the California DA's Association, we have a strong connection to all these issues. They've endorsed Measures for Justice, the mission, of measures for justice because we believe in it. And so I'm just much more optimistic that this is a wave that's going to sweep across the country. As long as we all use it, we got to use it.
I mean, the question is, in the future, again, we're in a transformational moment in this country, right? Where criminal justice is, on the front page every day. Everyone's talking about it. Nobody doubts it. People have been rallying in the streets. But is transparency essential for change, or is it a nice to have? I mean, it looks great, right? I mean, you look good, Jeff. Let's just be clear, right? I mean, but do prosecutors need it?
They need it now more than ever across our country. I mean, you look at what's going on. I would say, without it, we're operating in silos. As I've said before, so many decisions seem like a mystery coming out of the criminal justice system. And that's bred so much of the mistrust and the breakdown in our system. And that's why so many people feel the system's broken. So yeah, short answer, everybody needs to be more transparent with their data. And it's not just prosecutors, it's cops, it's courts, it's public defenders, it's probation, it's everybody in the system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's one tool among many, many things. Dwayne, did you have anything you wanted to add there? I mean,
I just thought that was a really important point to make, because the system is complicated and it includes a lot of actors that's making decisions that don't get accounted for. And one of the things that this data does is lets us see clearly the actions of like prosecutors, but I think it also lets us contemplate the decisions that other actors are making, because not that prosecutors need to be defended. I think prosecutors have in very real ways driven incarceration, but I also think that those other actors have a lot to be held accountable for. I mean, I think about, my mom's situation and other similar situations where defense attorneys thought that they could subvert somebody's right to dignity because they were trying to pursue something other than a prison sentence. And you don't get to denigrate people and degrade people because you feel like you're on the right side. And I think it's some of that that's happened for a long time, and it hasn't been accounted for either. Or using bootleg programs that aren't effective, and you use them because you need to get buy-in to keep somebody out of prison. But I think it's still a conversation to be had to say, well, a lot of these programs have been getting millions and millions and millions of state dollars, right, to run, and have been bankrupt. And the only people who know these programs don't work are other actors in the system besides prosecutors. And so, transparency is necessary, because I think transparency will reveal how much of a mess this is. And it's not a mess that is only on one party, I think it's all of our mess.
Yeah, it's all of our mess. That's for sure. Our tagline, you guys, is community-driven, data-informed. That's our new tagline. We used to be no data, no change, but now with Commons, it's community-driven, data-informed. What is community? What does community mean to you, Tessa? What does it mean? And are you optimistic that we can find a community, and that they will, the DAs will be willing to work with communities?
Well, there's so many different ways to look at community, because sometimes when I'm in conversation in our multicultural meetings, I am totally representing the Black community. And yet we have an Asian community, a Russian-speaking community, brown community. Our entire community needs this, because we're a microcosm of the larger nation, which is, damn near split down the middle, 50-50. And community means bringing both sides into conversation. And we're having these conversations in churches and in school district offices, everywhere. The name of the game we're talking about here is equity. Mm-hmm. How are we going to bring equity into the school system to give those that have been disproportionately disadvantaged, get them up to speed and move on so that they don't have to stay in the school to prison pipeline. The statistics, the data there. For every 3 Black kids, one of them's in that pipeline already by age 7. We gotta work on that. But so it goes in our brown community, or whether it's our Asian community who feels invisible, that nobody's listening. All of that makes up community. And our district attorney is part of our community too. And so in a moment when we get to work together, that's healing. That's a relationship that's going to sustain us, like I said, between assassinations and those hard moments like that. It's going to be good for any district attorney's office, any law enforcement entity to have been in conversation between those moments. So community, you can splice it and dice it up into a bunch of different ways, but community means Yolo County. That's what it means here.
Yeah, Dwayne, do you have any?
No, I mean, I agree. I mean, I'm not in Yolo County, but, you know, I think we need people like Tessa that's pushing that. I think it's really hard sometimes to find out what community you're a part of, because there's so many voices that's trying to be represented. I mean, I know it's folks from out here that have, you know, looked at me and just asserted that I wasn't a part of that community because they ain't know me, you know, and I'm on a stage hiring prosecutors, and they were like, yo, you're not a part of our community. And there too, I'm getting phone calls from people in prison. So, you know, I think actually establishing who is the community is really important, because it just creates, you know, unnecessary tension when we keep trying to find ways to segregate ourselves, whether it's based on race or occupation. Because I know, you know, people was quick to segregate me from them in their spaces when they thought I was robbing folks. And even when I came home from robbing people, people were quick to do that. And so I think one of our challenges is, in terms of doing this work, is to remember that the way that we define community, you know, my homeboy's like, yeah, my brother's a correctional officer. So how am I going to define community for him in a way that doesn't include the COs that are in his family, or the cops that are in his family, you know, or the killers that are in his family? So I think that that question of community is really complicated and one that we got to tackle. And looking at the data will make it even more challenging, I think, for everybody involved, because the data will maybe reflect poorly on how we feel each other as a community, you know?
Yeah, that's a very astute point, because it's almost like an in-group, out-group mentality. Like either you're in or you're out. And, you know, how are we going to get those who are out necessarily? Meaning, and again, there's people in prison, yes, like, but they're the people that are out in terms of, you know, they're living in communities, they're seeing the data portal. How are we going to get them to engage with Commons and with you? And, you know, how are we going to get them to use the data to hold the prosecutors accountable to the goal they make? What are you going to do? Like, how are you going to make them? How is the community? How are we going to rally people to be like, look, there is something here where we can hold the prosecutor accountable? How do we do that? Tessa.
Well, we have to arm them with the data. We have to educate them and let them touch it a little bit, and let them see themselves and their families in the data and the potential. You know, as you were talking, I was going, how would I? Because we have some folks in our community that are, I ain't gonna believe nothing about this district attorney, just flat out. And I sit with all the time, what is it going to take for you to acknowledge any positives that we could build on in our criminal justice system here in Yolo County? And I think that the Commons can go a long ways to it, because they can go to the Commons and say, aha, we got them dead to rights on this or that. And then our district attorney, the criminal justice system says, and we've got one of these in the works. And this is our pledge to you. We're going to do one of these, and vice versa. We need to use that data to encourage our Asian community to say, we do see you. You are not invisible. You need to, please do report those crimes. It ain't little thing to be sucker punched walking down the street. That's no little thing. So community has to reach out to other community, and then also work with that data and use that common ground, those common numbers to expand and to look at, different law enforcement bills, to look at the diversion programs. But our district attorney's office does work with our homeless population, does work in racial equity work, or I wouldn't be there, because you see, I won't hold my tongue. But he needs to come out and he can use this to show what he's been doing, and the community gets a chance to see it. We're going to grow. We got to grow this.
Speaking of growing it for 2.0, Dwayne, I want you to be thinking, I don't want to put you on the spot, but for 2.0, I'm thinking, what data can we get to change people's lives in prison? What can we give you to change people's lives the most? And I have a firm offer for 2.0 for you, okay? Yeah. If you have, any thoughts now, but just come back.
Yeah, randomly right now, I will say it's interesting because, some of the things are more obvious when you think about like misdemeanors versus felonies. And when you start to drop felonies by 10%, that allows you to pay more attention to the cases and the facts of the cases to really think about the cases you want to drop. I wonder if the same thing is true for, say, parole statistics. Virginia went from releasing 1% of people on parole to 13, yep. And 13 is still way too slim. And that thing exists across the states. And I wonder if there are a series of data points that you could gather around parole to help us begin to understand what are the stories behind those statistics. And then also, we have no clue how many people are in prison right now who got locked up as a juvenile in most states in this country. We have no clue how many people got 20 or 30 years in the 1990s. And so also metrics around who got what time for what crimes and what degree that sentence was predicated not on the facts of the case, but on the jurisdiction where you live. Because I know that when I got locked up, they were saying that that Fairfax was horrible on sentencing, but that in fact wasn't true. If you got the same crime I committed in Norfolk, Virginia, you would have had an extra 10 years on your sentence than I got by having committed my crime in Fairfax, Virginia, which was more, progressive even in the 90s than some of the places further down south in Virginia. But those are all things that theoretically, if we had a map of the past 20 years of incarceration, we could think seriously about those connections and those intersections and the narratives and the stories that come out of that. Okay. Again, it's amazing that we don't know any of this. I would probably have a PhD in literature and be a tenured faculty member at Harvard if I was fool enough to find the data myself. But congratulations to you guys, because your whole team is about to be tenured at Harvard somewhere for collecting all of this data and doing something.
No, we're not. We're taking it to the people. We're taking it to the local level. That's our mission. This is what we always wanted. What this conversation is what this organization has always been about. It's not about
when JoJo finds the Commons and writes an award-winning law review article that changes some policy or some white paper on a state level, because it really is what I think Commons is about, right? We think it's about what Jeff is doing and what Tess is doing and what I might be doing, but the truth is, it's going to be some kid that's in the cut somewhere that goes on the site and starts playing around with these numbers and writes some white paper, op-ed, think piece with his friends that actually makes us see something that none of us could notice. Because we're so deep in the weeds that we aren't even thinking about it from that angle. And the thing he notices is going to be because his aunt got caught up on this kind of case 5 years ago, or because his cousin got caught up. And I think that's the beauty of bringing this to the people. And he ain't going to want tenure. He just going to want freedom.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You know what? I'm just going to end it there because we're at time.
This is what you do, Amy. You got to go like this.
Okay, that was incredible. Anybody want to, any parting shots, anything else, any thoughts? I mean, I think that was, I love that for the next 2.0. And in terms of any other main messages you want people to take away, Tessa?
Go to the comments and touch on it. Take a run through on it and watch how much is right there at your fingertips. Because you could trip over a story to tell just because it's that easy to use. And you'll notice something that, like Dwayne was talking about, I love that, absolutely. Go there and just start using it. And then we'll meet you in town so we can talk about it.
All right. All right, you guys are the best. Thank you all. And as I said in the beginning, brilliant, amazing. And thank you. And thank you to the audience who came in and listened.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.